Imagine you wrote a novel 17 years ago, but your first literary agent gave up after sending your book to just a dozen publishers. And now it's sitting in a drawer while you're making collage cards and wondering if you should get a master's degree in art history just to keep yourself busy. So what do you do when you're 59 years old and your daughter sits you down and says, "Mom, this is an intervention. You need to get a job"? Today we're talking with Susan Kleinman, author of the novel All Afternoon, who discovered that sometimes the path from successful journalist at 25 to published novelist at 62 looks less like a straight line and more like the letter U. Susan shares how her parents taught her that money is how you put your values into action, and why she decided at 59 to essentially take the maternity leave she never got when her kids were babies. Sometimes retirement isn't about stopping work. It's about creating the space to figure out what work you were actually meant to do. If you've ever felt like you're too old to start over, or wondering whether you can afford to pursue the creative work that keeps calling you, this conversation will show you there's no expiration date on reinvention. Listen in.
Welcome to Making Change with Your Money, a podcast that highlights the stories and strategies of women who experienced a big life transition and overcame challenges as they redefined financial success for themselves. Now here's your host, certified financial planner, Laura Rotter.
Welcome, Susan, to the Making Change with Your Money podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk to you today.
Oh, I'm excited as well. I will start like I always do with the question. Susan, what was money like in your family growing up?
I grew up in a middle to upper middle class family. When I was little, my dad had just started his own CPA firm. As with any starting business, there were better years and there were worse years. When you're a kid, you have no idea. As long as you have everything you need, you have no idea that there are better years and worse years. I don't think I even really understood that until maybe 10 years ago when I was talking to my mom about it. And she said, "Do you remember when you were a kid, there were years we ate lamb chops and years we ate a lot of tuna casserole?" I said, "Yeah, I guess." And she said, "Yeah, the tuna casserole years were the not as good years." As with any business, things went up and down, but trended upwards. And as my dad's business grew, we were more comfortable. We were never rich. We were never poor. Throughout that time, more money, less money, there was a very strong message in my household that your money is the way you put your values into action. It's actually very aligned with the work you do, except my parents never used the word aligned. But your money is the way you put your values into action. So, for example, big push in my house to give charity. My parents were very charitable. They really drummed it into us that one of the things you do with your money is you give it to people or institutions who need it that you want to support. And then within that, right, there's where do you give your money? There are a lot of good charities, right? Yeah. But defining for yourself what's important to you, where do you want your money to go? But also, it's a way of defining your values and sort of telling yourself who you want to be in the world and living as the person you want to be in the world in terms of the money you spend on yourself, right? So, okay, charity is one thing, that doesn't go to you, but the money that you spend on yourself. So when I was, let's say, a teenager, my mom would drop me off at the mall with my friends, and she gave very, very clear limits as to what was to be bought and what was to be spent, right? So you can only buy, let's say, 3 skirts, and you cannot spend more on a skirt than $15. Now you know how old
I know, but even that, she went into that detail.
Right. I mean, there was a ceiling, right? But at the same time, in those same years, so it was not a reflection on what our family's financial situation was. There was a place my mom had access to, I don't even know how, on downtown New York, that was a huge book warehouse. Imagine 4 Costco-sized stores glommed together with those same floor-to-ceiling racks. And the whole thing was full of books. And once or twice a year, my mom would take me, and we would, when you go in, just like in Costco, pick up a shopping cart and wheel our way up and down the aisles, and I was allowed to take any book I wanted. So I would come home with 100 books, 50 books, and that would last me for the year. And there was always money for books. And you could see that in my house. The house was full of books. My room was full of books. That was very important to my parents. And I'm sure it has something to do with the fact that I became a writer, right? The fact that books are important and have this place of pride in a house. But that message that your money's finite unless you're a zillionaire, and instead of just throwing it around, really think about what is important to you, not just in the moment of, ooh, I want that pair of shoes, although I do the I want that pair of shoes thing. But in terms of really making deliberate decisions about what expenditures are going to give me a life that feels like it fits me as a person, right? And that was very important.
And that it was so clearly communicated to you. Did you have to, I'm just curious, did they have to pay for the books, or somehow she had access?
Yeah, no. We paid for the books. I mean, they were wholesale.
Yeah.
But I'm probably exaggerating when I say 100, but for sure, 50, for sure, at least 50 books. And my mom paid for it. I did not have to pay for them myself. And there were other things that I did have to pay for. So it wasn't that, oh, whatever you are going to acquire is going to be acquired on the parental dime. If I wanted a stereo, I babysat, saved money, and bought that. I wanted record albums, I saved money for that, even though my dad particularly was a music lover. But still, records I paid for myself. If I went out to lunch with friends, I paid for that myself. The books were, I didn't have to pay for my own clothes, but the books were something that were given to me.
That's a great way of translating to children what's important. And certainly you took that in. And I'm just curious, since you brought it up, Susan, were they always novels? What kind of books?
They were everything. They were novels. They were art books. I remember buying a book of Monet paintings. They were how-to books and self-help books. And please don't ask me what a 10th grader was doing reading all those self-help books. And no, they did not help. But it was everything. If I saw something and I thought, ooh, that's interesting, it went into the cart.
That is great.
A lot of novels too, but not only.
So, Susan, we discussed this beforehand. This is a podcast about women in transition. And one thing I know about you, we know each other for a while, but I certainly know you as a woman who is just about to publish her first novel, All Afternoon. And that seems like a big transition to me. Not many women just decide, as it feels to me, to write and publish a book. So where are you in your life's journey, and how did this come about?
So my personal life journey is that I'm an empty nester now. I have 2 children. One is 24, one is 22. They do not live at home except on vacations. So I have time that I never had. I always worked when my kids were little. I worked from home before working from home was a thing. I've been working at home since I was 25 years old, which is long before I had kids. And I always worked at home. And now that I'm an empty nester, I have more time. And my career has had 2 shapes. First of all, I said this to you in another conversation, a graph of my career would look like the letter U, like this, right? Whereas most people, I think, over time, start your career at a certain point, and it's never a straight shot to the top, or rarely a straight shot, and it's not a straight line. But over time, it'll kind of look like a graph of the stock market. It goes up one year, it goes down, but over time, it certainly trends up, 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 right? So I started my career at a high, and then things got even though I was working all the time, things got quiet and sort of, I always had good work and nice work that I enjoyed, but nothing, wow. And then
You
now
were
I
always
will be,
writing? I'm sorry, you were always writing, though, for some publication. Is that correct?
I
Or
was,
teaching writing?
I was most always writing in various capacities. So um, I had an internship in college at a magazine, and
I remember magazines, anyway.
remember those things? They were shiny. Yeah. So, and at the time, I was a senior in college and I was taking a writing class. So back then, as you will recall, we had to type our papers on typewriters. And if you realized that you wanted to change it, you had to retype the whole thing. Ugh. So I was working at the magazine. I am a terrible, terrible proofreader. And I had a piece that I had to submit to class the next day. And I asked my editor if he would proofread it for me. And he did. And he said, "Ooh, I really like this. Can we buy this for the magazine?" Now, hand on my heart, that this was not a setup. Okay. I'm not trying to get him to say, "Oh, we like this. Can we buy this?" He's a really nice guy. And if I had thought that maybe they wanted it and said, "Hey, might you be interested in this?" he absolutely would have read it. It was not a setup. And he said, "Oh, we want to publish this. Can we pay you for it?" And I said, "You most certainly can." Passed the check, and it was a humor essay, and they ran it in the back of the magazine. And then I wrote another one. And I hadn't, yeah, at the time, some people I knew who were around 10 years older than I was were starting to meet and date people in the personals ads of magazines like New York Magazine, Boston, Washingtonian. And the magazine I worked for in Philadelphia, which was called Inside, was connected to a newspaper that had also started running personals. So I asked if I could write a feature on personals, people meeting through personals. And my boss said, "Sure, take a stab at it." And I did, and I researched and I interviewed and I wrote it, and it became the cover story on the next issue of the magazine.
Wow.
So when I say my career started on a high, I graduated college already having that kind of credit. I went to work at a PR agency, which was not a great fit for me because I was under the mistaken idea that what you do in PR agencies is you write press releases all day, which is not true. And that writing press releases is like writing magazine articles, which is also not true. Not true. But while I was at the PR agency, I had a boss, fabulous boss, who is still a very good friend of mine, and she knew someone who was starting a publishing company, and she introduced me. And that woman, who was starting the publishing company, asked me if I would be interested in ghostwriting a book about hunting and fishing and camping for women whose husbands, I know you're making a face because you know me, whose husbands are into fishing and camping. And so she wanted to publish a book for the wives of such women and of such men. And would I be interested in ghostwriting it? Okay, so I have never been hunting in my life. I think I went fishing once when I was a kid, and my idea of camping is a hotel without room service. So I'm so not the person for this job, but I wanted the work, and I said yes. And she called me a few weeks later and said, "I'm very sorry, but the project is not happening, not with you and not with anyone else. So I'll keep you in mind for future things." And I thought, okay, you have a publisher on the phone with you. Don't just hang up with a thank you. So I said, "Well, what if I want to write a book of my own?" And she said, "And what would that book be about?" And then I thought, what would that book be? I was 23, I think. And I thought, the only thing I know about is being in your first year out of college. So then I hear the words coming out of my mouth. How about if I write a book about surviving your first year out of college? And she said, "Oh, I like that idea. Send me a proposal." So I sent her a proposal. She bought the book on spec.
Wow.
Wrote the book nights and weekends. The book came out a little bit before my 25th birthday, and so this was nonfiction, and the publisher sent me on a 10-city book tour all over the country. I was on TV, I was on radio, I was on CNN. It was a big deal. And when I say she sent me all over the country, and this is not false modesty or anything when I say this, I was nobody, right? I was a 25-year-old kid. Publishing was very different then, but she believed in me, she believed in the book, and she sent me all over. So it was fun and it was cool. And I was 25 and my career was up here. And from there, for no particular reason, things sort of, I don't mean went downhill like anything terrible happened, but that was a big deal at 25. And then I co-authored some nonfiction books with people. And then that kind of dried up and I was doing magazine work. And for most of my career, I was writing for magazines. And then, as you alluded to just now, magazines started going out of business right and left. And I was doing some teaching at the time, some tutoring. But I saw, this would be around 2008, during the housing crisis, most of my clients at that time were decorating magazines. So when there is a housing crisis and no one is buying a house, no one wants decorating magazines. And they were going out of business right and left. And my workload was shrinking and shrinking. I did at the time start getting work from the HGTV website. So I was busy still, but the magazines were closing. But I had one big client that I was really leaning on at that point, which was Metropolitan Home. And my editor there, do you remember that magazine? Fabulous
magazine. Yeah.
And my editor called me one day and he said, I have bad news. The magazine is folding. I said, since when? He said, they just called us into the conference room and told us. We were all blindsided. The magazine, that magazine was probably around 2010. The magazine was going out of business. And I thought, oh my goodness, what am I going to do next? At that time, so I had been writing mostly about interior design. I had maybe a year before gone to a suburb near my house. I had been assigned to interview someone about their fancy redecorated house. And I did the story and I did the interview. And then at the end, which is always, I don't know if you find the same thing, but you always find the most interesting things in the last 5 minutes when you already have your coat on. The homeowner told me about some writing classes she was taking at Sarah Lawrence College and these professors she had who were terrific. And I kind of stuck that in the back of my mind and didn't think about it again. Within weeks of when Metropolitan Home closed, the print catalog, physical paper catalog, remember those, for Sarah Lawrence Writing Institute landed in my mailbox. And I saw that these teachers she had mentioned were teaching a class, and I decided to sign up for the class. Parallel to this, while all of this is going on, and I have 2 little kids while this is going on, I started writing fiction. I started writing short stories, and some of them were starting to get published. And I wrote a short story. At the time I started writing this story, I had maybe 4 or 5 stories published. And I started writing a short story about a dinner party gone sideways, an academic dinner party, a professor and his wife, and obnoxious people who come to dinner. And I started writing the story, and I showed it to a friend of mine who's a novelist to get some feedback. And he said he liked it, but that he thought it was not a short story. It was the beginning of a novel and that I should keep going. So I get this Sarah Lawrence catalog, and this class is in beginning introduction to novel writing. So I thought, okay, that is kismet or something. And I signed up for the class. I had time on my hands because I didn't have enough work, and my kids were now in elementary school all day. And I took...
Stop you quickly. You were not the primary breadwinner, so you didn't have to worry so much.
Okay, so I was not and am not the primary breadwinner. However, I was at that time, when we bought our house, when we enrolled our children in private school, it was with the assumption that my career, like most people's careers, would trend up like the stock market. Now that was not happening.
Right.
So it was stressful, even though the mortgage was getting paid, but it was stressful. It was not just, shoe money that I was earning.
Okay, thank you for confirming
that. I signed up for the class, and the teachers encouraged me to apply for a fellowship that they had at Sarah Lawrence at the time, which was called the Catherine Gerfine Writing Fellowship. And I won the fellowship. So for a year, I got to work one-on-one with one of the professors from Sarah Lawrence. And in that time, I wrote most of the first draft of what is now All Afternoon. So that was in 2010. So here we are in 2026, and the book is being published in April 21st. Someone put it to me just like that yesterday. Mostly people say, "Oh, that's interesting. Was that part of the process?" But yesterday someone just cut to the chase and said, "What the hell took you so long?" Oh, okay, if you want to know.
Good question.
The first thing is that I'm a very fast journalist. I could bang out a magazine article in a morning, but I'm a very slow fiction writer. Even when I was writing short stories, it could take me 2 years to work on a short story. Obviously, that was never the only thing I was doing, because writing short stories does not pay, but I'm a very slow fiction writer. I finished writing the book, and I spent some time looking for an agent. I got an agent. I did with the agent what I thankfully did not do when I was dating, which was I said yes to the first one that asked for representation. And I had feeling in my gut that, as lovely as she was and successful in other parts of the business, she had never handled a book like mine before. And I had this nagging feeling that she was not the right person, just because of lack of niche alignment. And that turned out to be the case. And she gave up very fast. I mean, I think she sent it to a dozen people, 15 people, and she gave up and said, "Sorry, I can't sell your book." Now, most people I know who have books published, I mean, some people I know it sold at auction, the first people it was sent to, but it can take a year, 2 years of the agent sending it out. And there are many agents who will send not only to all the different divisions of the big 5 publishers, but to the mid-sized publishers and the small publishers. And she didn't want to do that. So the book went in a drawer, and it's very difficult to get an agent if someone has already sent it out to the big heavy hitters.
Oh.
And I thought, hey, this is not going to happen. It just, that's how things go sometimes, and it's not going to work out. And I put it in a drawer. And in 2020, I decided to send it to a small publisher that I knew. It was someone I had known over the years. And she was very interested and wanted to buy it. And we had a meeting set. She offered me a contract, and we had a meeting set up. And on March, I forget what, I emailed her and said, "Listen, my kids have both been sent home from school. My daughter was sent home from college. My son was sent home from high school because of this crazy virus." And I said to her, "Can we postpone our conversation for a week or two until this crazy virus thing is over?" So what you know from this, do not ever ask me to pick stocks for you, because I am not good at predicting the future of anything. So I thought 2 weeks later we would pick it up. And then a year later, we were all still locked down at home. And then actually 5 years ago this week, my dad passed away of COVID. And I just sort of took a step back from the things I was doing, except for I decided that for fun, I would write a romance. Because I thought, how hard could that possibly be for me? I don't know about other people. It was really hard. So I was slogging along with this other book. And one morning, my computer crashed. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back. It was a Sunday morning. My computer crashed. I started crying over my stupid computer, but I started crying. And my husband came in and said, "What's the matter?" "Oh, my computer crashed." And I said, "I can't do this anymore. I'm not doing this anymore." He said, "What this? I'll fix your computer." I said, "No, the writing thing, publishing thing." At this point, there were almost no magazines left, and I was teaching more. But I said, "I can't do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore." And he said, and everyone else I spoke to said to me, "You probably just need a break from it. Why don't you take 3 months off?" And I said, "I don't need a break. I need to be done. I do not want to write anything except birthday cards for the rest of my life. I'm done now." Okay, so I'm done. This would have been when I was 58, 59. It's very young to retire. My husband is still working full time. He has no interest in retiring anytime soon. But I decided, you know what? I have been working since I was 21. I worked when my kids were infants because I worked from home. I would put them down for a nap and I would work. And then I would pick them up from the nap and I would stop working. And I would pick them up from the nap. I thought, you know what? I'm going to take my maternity leave now when my children were out of the house already. So I was really just, for the first time, I was just bopping around. I would sleep late. I would drink my coffee slowly. And I started making cards, collage cards. So every day when I felt like it, I would do some arts and crafts. And then I would meet a friend for lunch. And then I would do some yoga. And I felt very happy. I thought, now I get the whole not working thing. This is kind of fun. And I thought this was great. But I also knew that it was not sustainable for the long haul. So I spoke with a career counselor who identified the fact that I always regretted that I had not majored in art history in college. I took one art history class my very last semester, and I was like, that's what I should have majored in. I could have had a V8. So we came up with a plan. I was going to get a master's. This would be 2 years ago, I think. I would get a master's in art history at one of the local state universities where the tuition was manageable. And then I would look for a job at a museum. I would be 61 when I got out. If I worked for 1 year, I would make back the tuition. And if I just worked even till I was 55, I would net positive and be doing something I liked. That was the plan. So I started taking some online classes. And then it occurred to me, I can't even remember why now, I'm not going to get a job at a museum. It's one thing as a 60-year-old person to apply for jobs doing something you have done before or something that is in some way connected because you have skills to bring to the table that someone just out of school does not have. But if I'm getting a degree in a completely new field, I have life experience, but I don't have any more experience in this field than a 24-year-old. I'm not going to get hired. And I went back to the career counselor and I said, I really want you to tell me if you think I'm just making up an excuse to get myself off the hook. And she thought about it and she said, no, you're not going to get hired. So if you want to get a degree for fun, go for it. But in terms of an investment in a new career, that's not going to happen. And I thought, I'm not in a financial position. At that point, I was paying, I think that was the year we were paying 2 college tuitions. I can't do this just as a hobby. So that was the end of that. And I went back to making cards. And again, I thought I was very happy.
I never knew you to be a visual artist, by the way, Susan. I, of course, knew you too.
So I never knew me to be a visual artist either. I started doing this during COVID and I just kind of kept up and I thought, okay, I'll figure something out. Maybe I'll do more tutoring than I'm doing now and to be busy and have an income. Anyway, my daughter, who had the summer before moved to Tel Aviv, came home for Passover. And one night she and my husband went out to Target because if you live in a foreign country, when you come to the U.S., the first thing you want to do is go to Target. So she and my husband went to Target. And when she came home, she said, Mommy, sit down. I said, is everything okay? She sat me down. She said, this is an intervention. These are her words. This is an intervention. Now, I don't drink, so I knew that was not it. And I really thought she was going to tell me that which I had, put on a lot of weight since she had moved away. And I really thought she was going to say, I'm concerned about you. You need to exercise more. You need to eat better. And in my head, I'm preparing myself. I'm saying, remember, it's coming from a place of love. Respond nicely. Don't get defensive. And as I'm thinking all these things, don't get defensive, she completely comes out of left field and she says, you need to get a job. I said, what? She said, not necessarily a job in an office. You need to go back to working again. And I said, what are you talking about? I'm very happy making my little cards and hanging out and sleeping late. And this is the life. She said, no, you're not. You seem very aimless. And
Interesting.
I don't think this is good for you. And I said, well, I'm not depressed. I'm perfectly happy. She said, that may be true. I don't think this is good for you. And I tend to listen to her advice because she has probably the highest emotional intelligence of any human I know. So I listen to her when she says stuff like this. And she said, why don't you, I had been working on another novel, a third thing,
romance.
Before she said, why don't you, even if you're not going to do anything with it, even if you don't want to be in the publishing world anymore, why don't you just pick a number of hours, let's say 3 hours a day, doesn't even have to be full time. From 9 to noon, you're going to sit at your desk and you're going to work on this thing. You need to be working toward a goal, Mom. So I told her I would do that. Somewhere in there, she said to me, do you still have that book you wrote when I was little? She was 8 when I first started writing all afternoon. And I said, yeah, it's on my computer. She said, can I read it now that I'm an adult? And I said, sure. And I emailed it to her and she called me up and she said, you have to get this book published. I said, okay, my dear daughter, you're so sweet. And I'm glad you like my book. And she said, no, it's good. I'm not saying that because I like you. I said, okay. And so I went back to the original publisher who had wanted it right before COVID. And I said, hey, are you still interested? And she said, yes. So I moved ahead with that. And then it became clear a few months in that this had been a mistake, that this was not a viable partnership, that this was not where I wanted my book to be for all kinds of reasons. That's a whole nother podcast. But I was too far in at this point to just scrap it. I had already told the whole world that my book was coming out. So I said, what am I going to do? And I started talking to friends who were quite successfully publishing their own books. And these are all people who are smart, but they are not geniuses. As I am smart, but I am not a genius. And I thought, okay, the intelligence level required for this seems to be smart, but not a genius. I'm in. And so that is what I decided to do. So I severed that relationship, which is never a fun thing to have to do. And I moved forward. And it was very scary. And it is still sometimes very scary. But it's also really fun. And I'm learning all kinds of new things. And I'm meeting all kinds of people. And the book is starting to get reviews. And it's getting really good reviews.
That's
so apparently my daughter is not the only one who likes it, which is very reassuring. It's getting really good reviews, like the kind that when I read them, they make me cry because I'm so happy. So that's where I am now. And the transition is in a lot of fronts, right? So it's from being a magazine writer to being a fiction writer, and being a working mother to being an empty nester, and being someone who I was always self-employed, but I never had to do all the different things, right? When you're self-employed as a journalist, they give you an assignment, you write the article and you send it in. You don't have to fight with computers, except that one time it crashed and I was crying. You don't have to do any technology stuff, right? You type your article in Word and you send it off and you're done. I did know from my time in the PR agency, I do have a background in PR and in marketing. So So that is very helpful. I'm digging that out the way, way, way back of my brain. And I'm
You've
having
been on Instagram for a long time, unlike most, I would say, of our friends. And if I think about a mutual friend who was on Instagram, it's because they were publishing a book. So you already sort of had
right.
that outlet.
So, and part of that was because in the time that I was not working, I had time on my hands. So I spent part of that time making cards and part of that time reading books and all kinds of things like that. But, your time is a vacuum, or your nature abhors a vacuum. I don't know, right? So if you have your phone in your hand and you have time on your hands, you will inevitably spend more time on social media than maybe you might have planned. So that's into it. And I actually find a lot of authors say they hate having to do the social media. They hate having to do the marketing. I enjoy it. I really
So you're
enjoy
lucky.
that part of my brain. And I'm fortunate. And I think all the time you have to be very extroverted to do the part of this that comes after the book is done and before it is in people's hands, right? So you can be very shy and sit in a room and write a book, but then you have to be building relationships and talking to bookstores. I was in conversation today with someone at a bookstore who wants me to do an event. I've been talking to people at synagogues and not-for-profits who want me to come be their speaker. If you're painfully shy, that must feel impossible. So I'm very fortunate that I love talking to people. As you can tell, I've barely let you get a word in edgewise, but I do like to listen. When I have a podcast, I'll have you on, and I promise I'll listen. But
yeah. I guess you're
so
going to say it's in keeping with your personality, like that. The getting out there works for you. I don't. I'm putting words in your mouth.
Yes, no, it does, and I enjoy it, and I find that it's really gratifying to. The other thing is, I'm almost 62. I'm making new friends. I've always had a lot of friends, and I make friends easily, but I am meeting so many people now and making a lot of friends. And some of them are just social media friends or work friends, but I've also made some really genuine friendships, which is a really exciting thing to be doing at this time in my life. Like it's very empowering, and it also makes me feel like I'm getting started again. So that's why when I said it's a U shape, right? So, okay, I had the book when I was 25, and then things were kind of, just routine. I was working like everyone works. And now I'm doing this whole new thing, and I'm really enjoying myself, except when I have to fight with my computer, but I'm enjoying myself. And I was thinking this morning that I read somewhere that everyone has an age they were born to be. Right. So some people love high school or love college, right? I did not love high school. I did not love college. And I have said to young adults that I know who also did not necessarily love college, you'll see. Some people are born to love college, and some people are born to love life after college. And I was one of those people. So I was in my late 20s, I felt like, okay, this is the age I was born to be, right? But now at 61, I feel like, okay, this is the age I was born to be, right? I mean, I'm not a baby person. I loved my babies, but I am not a, ooh, coochie, coochie, coo, I love babies person. I'm a teenager person, and I'm a young adult person. So I love when my kids' friends come to visit. Some of them come to visit when my kids are not home, and my kids think I like their friends, which I love so much. My kids accuse me of loving their friends more than I love them, which may or may not be true. I'm not going to tell. So I love having young adult kids, and I love having the freedom to move around and to travel. The one thing I don't love is that last night I got down on my yoga mat, I twisted, and I pulled the whole right side of my body. That probably would not have happened when I was 40, but I feel like this is an age that suits me. So I feel more comfortable in my life and in my skin than I have in a long time.
You are not the sum of your earnings. You are the sum of your yearnings. If you're ready to use wealth to create more freedom and flexibility, let's align your finances with what matters most. Together, we'll build a plan that balances your scarce resources of energy, time, and money, so you move forward with clarity, confidence, and less stress towards a life of true abundance. Learn more at www.trueabundanceadvisors.com and schedule a short conversation. I have a question about self-publishing. I know nothing about it. One you may or may not want to address I know friends who have self-published, but they've still sort of worked with people who help them self-publish. So I don't know if that's something you've done. And just as importantly, as you say that you're meeting new people, that you've gotten great reviews, like how, since your book isn't out there yet, how did your book get in the hands of reviewers and people
Okay.
giving you feedback?
So I'll answer the second part first, which is a big part of where books get discovered now is on social media, because as we have discussed, there are fewer and fewer magazines. There are fewer and fewer newspapers that run book reviews anymore. But if you go on Instagram and start looking, you will see there are hundreds, probably thousands, definitely thousands of people who have what they call bookstagrammer accounts, where people read and review books. And some of them
you were doing, right? I've definitely saw you.
I was reviewing some books,
okay.
Or just writing about the books I was reading. But there are people for whom this is a big part of their life, and some of them do it because it's fun, and some of them do it because they get free books, and which is great, right? I mean, it kind of brings them back to going to the Costco book place with my mom, like, yeah, books. And some people are able to monetize it, but I spent a lot of time. I'm terrible at math, but I'm a big data nerd. I love data and I love analyzing data, and just spent a lot of time on Instagram identifying who are some of these bookstagrammers who seem to like books like mine. Right? Not rom-coms, not mysteries. A lot of the bookstagrammers do write about rom-coms and mysteries and thrillers and that kind of genre stuff, which is fine, but it isn't what this is. And one of the friends I met is someone who had her book published with a teeny tiny publisher, and I started seeing her book on Instagram, and I asked her what she was doing, and she said, I'm reaching out to people and asking if they want it. And that is what I did. And I identified the people I wanted to speak to, the people I thought would, for whom the book would resonate, reached out to a bunch of people. Most said they would like to see the book. So I sent the book to these people, and they are starting to review them. And these are people I've never met in my life. Someone posted a review on Sunday. I'm not kidding. I started sobbing. It was so beautiful. And I thought, like, even my own mother wouldn't have said such nice things. It's very good to me, but, and this is someone I've never met. So before you have a book come out, at least for me, there is that period of time where you think, what if everyone in the world hates this, right? Which is not likely, because there's
very human to have that.
Right. I mean, that's how we're wired, to think of the worst possible scenario, right? What if I get horrible reviews? Now, any book that is ever published, there is going to be someone who does not like it, and it is inevitable that someone will read it and not like it and say so. And you need a very thick skin to deal with that. And I have pretty thick skin. But it'll still hurt, right? I mean, I'm a human being, but I'm very happy that the early reviews, and there've been a number of them, have been so positive from people who do not know from a hole in the wall. So I believe that they mean what they say. And it's a great feeling. I worked on this for so long, and to see that people are connecting with it and finding the characters relatable. And one of the people who read it, who's a woman who actually, I didn't realize when I first started speaking to her, lives in Denmark. Her English is excellent, which is why I did not realize she is not in this country. Read the book, and I had done a giveaway where I, like contest thing, and she was one of the people who won the book. She's not a book reviewer. And she started reading it, and she wrote to me and said, "Can I ask you a question? Were Marilyn and Jerry, the protagonist and her obnoxious husband in the book, ever happy before this all started?" And I thought, wow, someone feels enough of a connection to these characters to be wondering what they were like before. Now, obviously, before page 1, there is no Marilyn, there is no Jerry, there is no anything. But the fact that someone felt that they were relatable in that way was so meaningful to me and so touching to me. And I thought, okay, 17 years is a really, really, really long time. And there were so many times I put it in the drawer and I didn't take it out, or I put it in the drawer and I took it out. And that, even more than the reviews, having someone say, "Hey, what were these people up to before the book started?" as if they were real people. In that moment, I thought, okay, it's all been worth it. All the disappointment and the tears and the wrong turns and the do-overs and the start-overs have been worth it, because I'm starting to see that people really are connecting with the book and with the characters. And that just makes me really happy.
Susan, I have a question about the process. I recently read a book. I'm not a writer, and it was a broad book about life, mission, and purpose. But he made the comment that books sort of have their own life, and that if you, as the author, attempt to push a story in a direction, the story might push back. I'm just curious if you, and I know this was a while ago that you did most of the writing, but is that something that resonates?
Yes. And I used to think it was such BS when I would hear writers say, the characters took over and they had minds of themselves, and I'd be typing and I'd see that my character said something that I didn't even know I was going to make. And I used to think, what a load of baloney. It happened so many times when I was writing this book. I'd just be type, and be like, ooh, you said what? Ooh, he did what? So yes, it absolutely resonates. It really does happen. And probably someone right now is listening and saying, what a load of baloney. But I can't speak for other people, but it is my truth. This really happened a lot.
Oh, I love that. So we're coming towards the end of our conversation. I do like to end with a certain question, and I want you to, talk about the book a little bit for our listeners so that they're potentially interested in.
Okay, that would be wonderful.
Share that I think is important.
So first of all, this is what it looks like. I should have shown you. This is what the paperback looks like. And it is the story of, it takes place in 1978 in a close-knit Jewish community. I grew up in 1970 everything in a close-knit Jewish community, but the book is not autobiographical. The main character is a wife and mother who had given up her career. She was an aspiring writer, and she had given up her career when she got married and had kids, as most women did back then, right? So she would be of my mom's generation, let's say, because her kids were teenagers when I was a teenager. And her husband is forever bringing home and talking about these fascinating women who are showing up now at the little college where he teaches, because it was the late 70s and more women were going into academia, and his school had just started hiring women. And Marilyn, the wife, is forever throwing these dinner parties and entertaining them, and the people are rude to her, and they look through her and talk over her and ignore her. And then a friend of her husband's, who is a famous writer, comes to see them, comes to dinner, and he has a new book coming out, and he asks Marilyn to read it. He remembers, and he's really the only person who remembers, that she once was a writer and wanted to be a writer. And he asks her for some feedback and for some help with the new book he's writing. And then she starts sneaking into Manhattan to see him. And their relationship becomes complicated, and she starts really having to think about what it is she wants. And it is, to be clear, it is not a love triangle kind of story, but really these two men represent two different types of life that she has led at various times in her life. And she has to decide what elements from each of them she might want, and really what she wants to do and who she wants to be in the world, which I think 70s, 90s, 2026 is something that we all think about, right? Who do I want to be in this world? I have one life. What do I want to do with it? So the book is about all of that, and about her having to really confront what has become of her life and what she might make of her life.
Thank you. And that theme really so resonates, I know, with me, as I sort of, recognize that my time is limited. And so am I spending each day the way I want to, almost as you described your daughter looking at you and commenting on, is this exactly how you want to be spending your life? So it sounds like a theme that can resonate with all of our listeners. And I guess I always end with the question, what does success look like for you now? I feel like, Susan, you sort of answered that as saying like that you feel like this is your age, like this is, you've come into your own. But if you, as we end, address what exactly that means for you.
So when I listen to your podcast, which I always do, I know that you have often specifically asked, what does financial success look like for you? I think it's all well and good to think I want to do what I want to do and I want to live how I want to live. I think it's very important to not be lying awake at night worrying about what happens when you're retired and your spouse, if you have a spouse, is retired. I think that can be tremendously stressful. The women in my life, in my family, tend to live very long lives. So I have a cousin who just passed away at age 103. So I'm 103, and that's actually not, there were tons of like great aunts and first cousins once removed who lived well into their 90s. So I am conscious of the fact that I need to have money in the bank for my retirement. And my husband is conscious of the fact, we're on the same page about that. So if you go into a store and the cashier is looking crabby, I kind of make it as a challenge to myself, right? Okay, can I get this person to smile, right? And for me, if I leave the store now and the person seems to be in a better mood than when I pulled up to their checkout line, that's a little win, right? You feel like we all have the opportunity in little ways and in big ways just to make other people's day a little better, right? To make other people's lives a little better. Writing a novel is not finding a cure to cancer, and it's not solving the homelessness problem or any of those big things. But I feel that if this book, first of all, if it can entertain people or make people laugh, because there are a lot of funny parts, that's great, right? We all need to laugh and we need to read and we need to be entertained. And also, if it helps someone, which I didn't start out with a mission, I'm going to have a message, but if it helps someone take a look at their own life and think about, okay, now I'm going to turn this on myself and ask myself the same question that Marilyn, the protagonist, is asking herself of, am I doing what I want to be doing? Is this how I want to live my life? And for women in our age group, look, the reality is anything can happen to any person at any time. All kinds of tragedies happen, and to young people, and some people like my cousin lived to be 103. But I think a lot about something my grandfather said to me, which was, we were talking about something, and I was like, oh, life is too short for this nonsense. And he said, he was a European immigrant. And he said, I said, life is too short for this nonsense. And he said, sometimes life is very long. He was 86 when he said this. Sometimes life is very long, but even so, it ends. Right. And that sticks with me. We don't know how much time we're going to have. And I do not like to waste my time, white knuckling it and wondering when is going to be my last day or my last opportunity or whatever, because that's really not a fun way to live. But it's in the back of my mind. Today, by coincidence, today is actually the anniversary of my dad's passing.
Oh,
so, wow. We lose people we love, hopefully at an old age, sometimes not. My dad was in his 80s, so he had a nice long life, right? But time's a ticking, time's a ticking. And that doesn't mean every minute has to be doing volunteer work and, picking litter up off the street. Not every minute has to be meaningful in that big picture way, but every minute needs to be something that at the end of the day, you're not thinking, really? I wasted my time on that. So, if you're enjoying a TV show, great. If you're doing what I way too often end up doing, which is scrolling through Netflix for an hour, looking for a movie and not finding anything I want to watch, why am I doing that? Right? Like, time's a ticking. So I think about that a lot now. And I think it is pushing me to not postpone things or to take opportunities. So last week, my husband had seen this thing for some music he wanted to go see in the city. He said, hey, you want to go see this? I said, sure. We came back, then he saw some other thing. He's like, oh, you want to go see music on Thursday night? Sure. Now, last Thursday night, we went out to hear music. It was, you live near me. It was freezing. Yeah. And I was tired. And I was I forget what happened, but I was crabby. And my husband came home and I was like, I'm really tired and I'm really crabby. And he said, do you not want to go to the concert? And I said, no, I want to go. And I think 20 years ago, I would have said, yeah, I'm just not in the mood. The tickets were very inexpensive. I would have happily eaten $30, whatever. But now I feel like, you know what? It's okay that you'll be cold. You have a coat. And if you're crabby, maybe if you go hear the music, you will be less crabby, which in fact I was, and we had a great time. So I think I'm saying no more often to things I want to say no to. And I'm saying yes. I've always been good at saying no anyway, and I'm saying yes to things that I realize, God bless you, that I realize are an opportunity that may pass. So yeah, there'll be another concert, right? I mean, I'm still here a week later. I could go to a concert tonight, but there won't be that concert, right? So I'm saying yes to more things like that spontaneously. And instead of needing an excuse to say yes, I feel like I don't need an excuse to say yes. I'm allowed to say yes just because it's going to be fun.
I love that. And again, something that really does resonate with me about learning to say no, not to have so much in my calendar. And yet when I say yes, it does come from a place of excitement. Like, okay, we're going to do this. Sometimes so many things sound exciting to me. So I say too many yeses. And I feel like, Susan, we started this conversation from your discussing that values were very clear in your family. And so you strike me as someone who is aware of what you value. You value feeling alive, you value friendships, and you value making a difference in your way.
Yeah, I do. And that's the way I was raised. That is the way I have tried. And my husband, we have tried very hard with our kids. So far, so good. They're still in 20s, it's looking
I think
like
they're cooked. I mean, around that age, my kids are a little older, but I think in their like early mid 20s, I'm like, all right, you're already baked. I did what I could. You're baked. I continue to model, but it's your life.
right. I have two kids who are 2 years apart. They could not be more different. And they each are living the values we try to instill in them, and also their own values in their own ways, right? It's not for me to tell them this is how you live and this is what your values must be, although I've made clear what my values are. And to a great extent, they seem to be in line with that. But it's not my place to tell them what their values should be. But it is my place, I think, as a parent to tell them that part of the job of being in your 20s and for your whole life is to figure out what's important to you. And then, number one, spend your money in line with what's important to you, and also spend your time, right? Money, hopefully, if we spend money today, hopefully we can earn more tomorrow. Time is not a renewable resource. So think about what you want to do and what you want to do with your time. And they do that. So I'm really proud of them.
Great message. Thank you so much for being
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Put a link to your book, of course, in the show notes.
Thank you.
Looking forward to reading it.
Thank you so much. Yep, April 21st.
Thanks for listening to Making Change with Your Money. Certified financial planner Laura Rotter specializes in helping people just like you organize, clarify, and invest their money in order to support a life of purpose and meaning. Go to www.trueabundanceadvisors.com/workbook for a free resource to help you on your journey. Disclaimer, please remember that the information shared by this podcast does not constitute accounting, legal, tax, investment, or financial advice. It's for information purposes only. You should seek appropriate professional advice for your specific information.